When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: The Boys in the Band. User: R0CKGuru55. Posted April 3rd, 1998.
One of the cruelest things about life is that you don't know you're in the good old days until they're over. Your friends, your family, when they're with you in the moment, they simply are as permanent and immutable as the air around you. Then, one by one, the world takes them from you in some way or another. At first, this too feels like a comfortable part of the process. It's painful, but you have each other to lean on, your friendship of phalanx against the existential dread which is death's accompaniment. Then, as time moves on, you drift apart, the phalanx separating until it dissipates entirely. You're left to bear the mounting losses alone until it's your turn to stare down that long hallway. When we started the Tuesday night social club at McKean's, none of us would have guessed it would come to help define us all for so long. In the beginning, it wasn't even a thing. It was just me and Bill McKean knocking back shots Tuesday nights after he'd closed the bar. Maybe if we were in the right mood, I'd play the piano and he'd strum a little. Mike Kittredge was a drummer, newly divorced. On the Tuesday night, Bill and I invited him to stick around. The music started to flow and he kept time, beating a rhythm on the bar until his hands went numb. It went like that all night. 3 white-collar guys in their 30s who were never good enough to make it as musicians, not in the way they dreamed of, shooting the shit and playing some old favorites. There was never any official declaration that we were a band. What happened was, one of those nights, somewhere along the line, Mike brought in his drum kit, and that first cymbal hit was the dividing line. Tuesday Night Social Club was born. Since it was Bill's bar, I'd argue there's no band who's had an easier time booking their first gig. The 3 of us essentially functioning as elevator music while the midweek crowd killed beers. This was all in the halcyon days before TVs ruined the social element of going out for drinks. In the beginning, it was all covers, or at least as close as a 3-man band with no singer could get. There were no illusions about what was going on. We were scratching an itch in exchange for just enough tips to prove to our wives or girlfriends we weren't out all night chasing women. Then Ellery moved to Seattle and everything changed. He wasn't much to look at, early 20s, all stringy and washed out, threadbare purple cords barely hanging onto his hips. He sat at the bar, downing Coors for most of the night, alternating between writing in a notebook and periodically looking at us on the small riser Bill had set up in the corner. His guitar had just sounded out the opening notes to our last number, Bad Company's Shooting Star, when the kid shifted unsteadily to his feet. From behind the piano, I watched him weave toward the stage. My most pressing concern was where he planned to Ralph and whether or not I could get out of the way before it happened. Instead, it was like the music had a sobering effect on him. Each approaching step seemed to blow away more of his haze, like the music was peeling back layers of old paint to reveal the chrome underneath. Bill threw a look my way. I shrugged. A second later, the kid was on stage and singing that first verse. Well, Johnny was a schoolboy when he heard his first Beatles song, Love Me Do, I think it was. From there, it didn't take him long. 1,000 variations of this story has played itself out everywhere people play music, and it rarely goes well. At best, you hope for someone who has a little karaoke swagger. Most of the time, you get a yowling drunk who needs to be escorted off stage. Not Ellery, though. His voice was sonorous and deep, imbuing every single note with the longing of a much older man. It was perfect. He was perfect, and that perfection elevated the rest of us. We played tighter, his energy making us into something more than a bunch of middle-aged guys marking time. The crowd felt it too. A dozen or so regulars looking up from their drinks and conversations as if hearing us for the first time. I'd love to say they rose to their feet and cheered, which of course they didn't, but seeing those hard faces turn towards us one by one was almost as good. When it was all over, the three of us knew this scrawny kid with the skyscraper voice was in until he figured out he could do better. This is when Tuesday Night Social Club became a thing. Ellery never told us his last name or why he'd come to the city. Didn't want to talk about what he did for a living, though if I'd had to guess, it was some form of manual labor. Skinny though he may have looked, a gear that had had us huffing and puffing, he could lift as if it were packed full of feathers. And Jesus, he could write. That notebook I'd seen him scribbling in was one of dozens. They're single-spaced pages full of lyrics that, like his voice, should have been beyond someone his age. The first one of his songs we ever rehearsed was called From That Moment On. And while most of it has faded from memory, I've managed to hang on to the final verse. You turned on a light, and suddenly I was wide awake. You showed me my heart and how easily it could break. It set the tone for what Tuesday Night Social Club became to all of us. We went from a covers band to playing exclusively Ellery's originals, and the crowd loved it. Some people live for the weekends. We lived for Tuesdays when we could truly become the people we'd always wanted to be. His music brought us to life. No, we never broke big and toured the world. This isn't that kind of story. What we did was bring joy to some people's lives while finding balance in our own. Most people don't get to do that until they get to heaven. Me, I got to do it for 10 whole years. Heaven, for us, ended at the bumper of a speeding Honda. It'd be funny if it weren't so fucking sad. After a show, Ellery was hit by a car on his way home. Simple as that. This funny, dynamic, talented son of a bitch who'd changed our lives with literally hundreds of his own original songs was gone. If he'd had any people, they didn't claim him, and we all ended up pitching in for his funeral. The next Tuesday went by, and while we were all at McKean's, none of us much felt like playing. So went the following Tuesday and the one after that. Just like how we'd unanimously become a band without ever saying it out loud, it ended the same way. There were attempts at a reunion over the next decade, moments where the three of us would noodle around while folks downed their sorrows, even playing some of Ellery's stuff, but it never stuck. Bill McKean died of a stroke in '88. It blew his circuits out while he was polishing the bar where it made a living for as long as I'd known him. They didn't find his body until the next morning. Mike and I attended the funeral with Mike's new fiancée. The next year, they got hitched and moved to Omaha to be closer to her family. He's gone now too. Lou Gehrig's disease, I'm told. It happened in '96, but I only found out this year when I bumped into one of his cousins at the A&P. The information was relayed to me in such a casual way that it took me a few minutes to process it. Suddenly, standing in the overlit produce aisle of my least favorite grocery store, it hit me that all the memories from the best part of my life were of the dead. Of the four men on that stage, I was the only one left alive. Unexpected tears swelled up in me so quickly I had to abandon my basket. Even then, I barely made it out the door before completely losing control. It's been a year since then, and now I find myself sick. The doctors don't know exactly what it is yet, though it hardly matters. There's a weight on my chest and it won't go, I suspect, until it squeezed the breath out of me completely. It's a funny thing, realizing you're gonna die. Not in the abstract way of youth or even the anxious scrambling of middle age. This is like I've ordered myself some dinner and it's only a matter of time until the driver knocks on my apartment door. I know it's coming because I can hear them. Mike, Bill, Ellery. Initially, it was only when I walked past the boarded-up front of McKean's. Faint strains of music so familiar it may as well have been my own name. Now, I hear them everywhere. Some days, when the rock on my rib cage sits heavier than others, I can even see them. They're exactly the way they looked when life was good, and for that one night a week, the planets aligned. They play and play and play, stopping only long enough to gesture at the empty seat behind the piano. The boys in the band waiting for me to help them bring it home.
Subject, The Crate, Part 2. User, Z072PD1. Posted, June 26, 2000.
I wasn't invited, obviously. I turned in my badge, left my keys on the counter, and walked out without saying goodbye. I honestly had no plans to return, but when they announced the reopening, the reveal night, I knew I couldn't stay away. Something told me to go. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was fear. Maybe I just needed proof I wasn't crazy. Well, when the night got here, I didn't bother shaving. Fuck them high society types, right? And I threw on my old windbreaker from patrol and headed downtown. I stood across the street from the museum and watched, smoking cigarette after cigarette until my fingers went gray. From the outside, the museum looked the same. Floodlights across the marble, music drifting out into the night air. There was laughter, clinking glasses, and women in gowns that I bet cost more than my first car. A valet gave me a side eye when I finally crossed the street, but no one stopped me as I walked towards the alley. I still remembered the side door code. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. Not AC cold, grave cold. It felt like the whole damn building had been emptied out from inside, and nobody told the walls yet. I stayed in the shadows near the gift shop, waited and watched. Gallery 9, or the new donor wing, was roped off with velvet and lined with staff and bow ties. I recognized a few faces, board members, local TV anchors, and even the mayor. Everyone was smiling too wide, everyone drinking too fast. Then, the lights dimmed. A spotlight cracked open above the case, still covered in heavy black velvet, and the air thickened. A man I didn't recognize, slick hair and British maybe, stepped up to the microphone. His voice had that too smooth sermon cadence. "Tonight," he said, "we open a window into a past that predates language, an object older than belief. What you are about to witness is not an artifact, it is a memory." The walls started to hum, not loud, deep, like something gnawing inside your own bones. No one in the crowd seemed to notice, though. They were probably too drunk or just too rich to give a shit. Then the British guy reached over into the glass case, and as soon as I saw his hand move toward it, I heard myself say it, too loud, "No!" Heads turned, and I took a step forward, but just as I did, he pulled the cloth away. The thing underneath wasn't an object at all. It was a wound, circular, pulsing, layered in rotten seams and fleshy glyphs. It didn't reflect the light, it swallowed it whole. For a second, no one moved. Then, the sound came, 100 wine glasses shattering at once. The mayor dropped to his knees, clutching his temples. One of the trustees ripped open her own dress, scratching at invisible wounds. A man in a tuxedo slammed face first into the marble, teeth splintering like cheap glass. Another woman stood still, blood pouring down from her eyes in slow, steady rivers, staining her pearls crimson. It was everywhere now, screaming, bleeding, the music still playing, dragging itself apart into wails of broken strings. I looked up at the man on stage, and that's when I saw that smoky figure once again. It looked as if he had been inside the man, as if he had taken it over. The shock was too much to bear, and I stumbled back into the hallway, heart hammering. The security monitors were still up behind the reception desk, and I had to look. I don't know why. I just had to. Gallery 9 was full. Dozens of people were there on their knees, not collapsed, kneeling. Hands out, heads bowed. Blood pooling in wide, wet halos around them. Some of them were swaying together in rhythm. The object pulsed again, not in light and not in color, in shape. Like it was flexing, growing. And then I saw one of them stand, A woman, soaked in blood, laughing softly like she'd just remembered a joke that had been on the tip of her tongue for years. Then another and another, still bleeding, still trembling, but smiling now. I will never forget that face as long as I live. The problem is, how much longer do I really have? I feel like I've been infected, like I'm next.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.